Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. We're going to look at two images today that were both submitted by Rich, who's an advanced photographer. This is the first one, a really beautiful landscape shot and architectural shot of a pier in Galveston, Texas, and then the second shot of a rail yard moving out towards the downtown skyline of Galveston. A backstory on both of these images is very similar because Rich shot them on the same morning. He says he went to Galveston, Texas for a wedding, and he had this sort of expectation about historic Galveston and the beach and everything, maybe from having been there a long time ago or maybe just from people talking about it. But he said when he got there, what he was expecting to find wasn't there, and it was a big letdown, and then he just sort of remembered to kind of go with the flow, and he went out on Sunday morning and found a couple of things that inspired him. The pier and the rail yard shot that we just looked at. The metadata is pretty similar here. Both were shot with a Canon Digital Rebel, same lens, 17 to 85 zoom. This was shot on the wide end, 17, after the conversion becomes sort of 28, pretty wide. I would call anything longer than 24 to me is sort of semi-wide, still pretty wide angle. And the interesting thing about this one is Rich stopped almost all the way down on the lens, f19, put on a neutral density filter to slow his shutter down to 2 seconds to soften the water up here. And I'll just go ahead and say something about that right now. I think it was a great choice. You know, the thing about water and landscape shots, if we're working sort of traditionally, is that if you freeze the water, say you shoot it a quarter of a second or faster, there can be so much local contrast in water with bubbles, and you really can get a huge difference between light and dark. And that patterning, all those high contrast ideas can just overwhelm anything else. So I think to slow this down some, but to still leave some really beautiful, softer space shapes in here and really beautiful movement that in some respects breaks this up and rhymes with the sky, I think was a great idea technically. There's something else going on here that happened as a result of the weather. You probably already figured it out, but I'll just let you guess about that for a second while we go over and talk about the metadata on this one. It's almost the same with the exception that Rich was shooting this from an overlook on a bridge and he zoomed out more here. This is sort of short telephoto, effective focal length of somewhere around 65 millimeters. And I'm going to come back and talk about this one a little bit more at the end of the critique. And essentially what we're going to do now is mainly work on this one. Rich had some questions about this one, some questions about the other one too, but this one I'm actually going to do some Photoshop editing on. Rich said that it was a very hot and humid morning and his gear totally fogged up. His lens fogged up to the point where there was fog inside of it, so he couldn't get rid of it. And he ended up with this very sort of mystical, misty looking image, and it sucks so much contrast out of this that he said he's already made about 5 different curves adjustment layers to this. And his question was, he said, I wonder if the light area over here is too bright, and I wonder if it's just too flat still. You know, is this too open? Should there be more contrast? Obviously it's completely subjective, but Rich is asking me. He's probably assuming that I'm going to be the one doing the critique since I've been the one that's always done them. And I love this just the way that it is. I mean, one of the really cool things about something quote unquote going wrong, like your lens getting fogged, is it can lead to a really beautiful feeling in a landscape shot. This has happened to me a blue zillion times shooting commercial work and personal work. I've shot a ton of coastal stuff in the southeastern United States in the spring and summer, and finally learned, you know, to start putting my gear in the bathroom with the tub full of very hot water at night, or leaving it in the trunk of the car, so that this didn't happen to me. But I just did a whole series of pier shots earlier in the year, and I got a lot of fog on my lens, and it led to some cool effects. This has a real open feeling to it, almost like high dynamic range or a platinum palladium print, and it kind of feels mystical, almost like illustration or something as a result of that. So I like this variation. To me, one of the most fascinating things about the image is that Rich framed this in a way where he didn't get the other support here. You've got all the pairs, and then you don't have anything here. When I first looked at the image, I was like, oh man, mistake. That was kind of the first thing I thought. But then I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is really cool because it pulled me over there, and it's bright. But when I got out in there, I was like, God, this is amazing how this sky is has so much beautiful detail, and there's such a great pattern in there. And then I came back and I went over here, and then I was like, wow, that creates this ongoing tension, and I keep going over there, but I keep coming back. This is so strong too. It helps to pull me back. I really like the rhythm Hey, by the way, I would love to hear what other people think about this post being missing. It's something Rich really didn't even talk about. I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the composition outside of this really gorgeous sky. I love the rhythm between these two things, you know, and at the same time it's very dynamic. There's an architectural rhythm with the windows, but this is all sort of this real heavy, heavy gray, and then this is black and white. So it's really cool how these two things are playing off of each other.